The twin suns of verdant plains rose over fields of golden wheat that stretched to the horizon. Sarah Nakamura stood on her porch, coffee in hand, watching the automated harvesters begin their morning routines. 3 generations of her family had turned this world from an empty rock into humanity's breadbasket. 12 million people called it home now. They grew food for half the human colonies in this sector. "Mom, the school transport is here." Her daughter May called from inside. Sarah smiled. May was 10 years old, brilliant and curious, always asking questions about the stars. Last night she'd asked if there were farmers on other worlds, tending other crops. Sarah had told her yes, probably somewhere in the vast galaxy. She had no idea how wrong that answer would prove to be. The Chromoth Collective had been watching verdant plains for 2 years. They were an old species, ancient by human standards, with technology that could crack moons and ships that moved like whispers through space. They had built their civilization on a simple principle: efficiency through exploitation. They didn't see other species as equals or even as enemies. They saw them as resources. Biological resources. Commander Vexenal reviewed the final reports from his scouts. Verdant Plains was perfect. The humans had no significant military presence, just a few patrol ships and some orbital platforms. The population was young and healthy, adapted to agricultural work. And best of all, they were isolated. Help from Earth was 6 weeks away. Begin the harvest. He ordered. The Chromoth fleet dropped out of hyperspace at 0600 hours local time. 70 ships materialized in orbit, their scanning beams sweeping across the planet like searchlights. Within minutes, they had identified every settlement, every farm, every gathering of humans. Sarah was helping May with her homework when the sky turned violet. She looked up through the window and saw things descending through the clouds. Ships, dozens of them. They weren't human designs. "May, go to the shelter. Now." "But Mom, now." The harvester ships landed in the fields, crushing the wheat beneath their weight. Chromoth soldiers emerged, tall and insectoid, their movements precise and mechanical. They carried devices that hummed with energy, scanning every human they encountered. They didn't ask questions. They didn't make demands. They simply sorted adults between 18 and 50, valuable for labor; children over 6, trainable for specialized tasks; the elderly and very young, inefficient, to be left behind. Sarah watched through the shelter's viewport as May was pulled from the school transport with 30 other children. She screamed her daughter's name, but the shelter walls were thick and May couldn't hear her. The last thing Sarah saw was May's terrified face looking back toward their farm. Before a Chromoth soldier guided her into a transport ship, the harvest took 6 hours. When the Chromoth fleet departed, they took 3 million humans with them. They left behind 9 million traumatized survivors and a world in ruins. The wheat fields burned where ships had landed. The schools were empty. The hospitals overflowed with people in shock. And across verdant plains, parents searched desperately for children who were gone. 2 weeks later, Ambassador David Chen stood before the Stellar Assembly on Unity Station. The Assembly was the galaxy's primary governing body. where 47 member species debated policy and settled disputes. Humanity had been granted observer status 20 years ago. They could speak, but not vote. Chen had prepared his presentation carefully. He had recordings from verdant plains. He had testimony from survivors. He had biological scans showing that many of the taken humans were children. He had everything he needed to make an irrefutable case. The assembly chamber was vast, a spherical room where representatives from dozens of species sat in floating pods, arranged in concentric rings. At the center was a speaking platform where Chen now stood. Honored delegates, he began, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. 48 hours ago, the Chromath Collective launched an unprovoked attack on our colony of verdant plains. 3 million human beings were abducted. Our preliminary intelligence suggests they have been taken to Chromath processing facilities, where they will be used as forced labor. He activated the holographic display, showing the attack footage. Parents torn from children. People herded like livestock. The systematic sorting of human beings by age and physical capability. We come before this assembly to demand 3 things. First, the immediate return of all abducted humans. Second, criminal prosecution of those responsible for planning and executing this attack. Third, guarantees that such an attack will never happen again to any species. When he finished, there was a long silence. Then the Chromath representative activated his pod's communication system. His name was Executive Venth, and his voice carried the same mechanical precision as all his species. The human representative mischaracterizes a standard resource acquisition operation. The Chromath Collective identified an underutilized biological resource pool and harvested it according to our needs. All individuals taken have been processed humanely and will be assigned to appropriate labor roles. Chen felt his hands clench. You call kidnapping 3 million people resource acquisition? We call it adaptation to galactic realities, Venth replied. Humanity is young. You have not yet learned how the galaxy functions. Resources flow to those with the capability to claim them. Your colony had resources. We had need. We acquired. The debate continued for hours. Chen heard every variation of bureaucratic dismissal, regrettable but not unprecedented, outside assembly jurisdiction. Internal matter for Chromath sovereignty, perhaps a cultural misunderstanding. Finally, the assembly's chancellor, an ancient being called the architect whose species had been traveling the stars for 30,000 years, called for a vote on intervention. The result, 30 to against, 11 in favor. For abstentions, the architect's voice was like wind through stone. The assembly has determined that direct intervention is not warranted. However, we encourage both parties to pursue diplomatic resolution. The Chromath Collective is invited to offer compensation for any unintentional distress caused. Chen stared at the Chancellor in disbelief. Compensation? You're offering us money for our children? The Assembly has rendered its decision, the architect replied. This matter is considered closed. Chen walked out of the chamber. Behind him, he heard Executive Venth speaking to another delegate, his voice carrying just loud enough to ensure Chen could hear. Humans complain much, but accomplish little. They will accept whatever we offer and return to their farms. They lack the strength to be anything more than prey. Chen stopped walking. He stood in the corridor for a long moment, that last word echoing in his mind. Pray. He returned to Earth and delivered his report to the United Earth Council. When he finished, the council chamber was silent. President Catherine Osei finally spoke. Recommendations, Ambassador. Chen looked at each council member in turn. These were good people, elected leaders who had spent their careers building bridges and seeking peaceful solutions. He hated what he was about to say. I recommend we accept nothing. I recommend we say nothing more to the Assembly. And I recommend we begin documenting everything. Documenting? Ask the Defense Minister. Every person taken. Every crime committed. Every Chromoth official involved. Chen's voice was cold now, emptied of emotion. We're going to create a ledger. And someday, when we're ready, we're going to settle every account. The vote was unanimous. The project was called the Ledger, and it began the next day. Every human government participated. Every survivor was interviewed. Every piece of data was collected and verified. Sarah Nakamura sat across from a young woman with kind eyes and a recording device. Tell me about May, the woman said gently. Sarah described her daughter. Her laugh, her curiosity, the way she asked impossible questions, the scar on her left knee from falling off her bicycle, the stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 3. Everything that made May a person, not a number. The interviewer documented it all. Across verdant plains, across Earth, across every human world. The same scene repeated millions of times. Parents describing children, children describing parents, friends describing friends. The ledger grew. 3 million names, 3 million faces, 3 million lives reduced to data points, waiting for the day when data would become justice. But humanity did more than document. They began to change. It started with education. Every human child now learned not just mathematics and literature, but strategic thinking and resource management. History classes focused on civilizations that had survived against overwhelming odds. Physical education became more rigorous. Language programs expanded to include every major galactic tongue. The economy shifted. Luxury industries contracted. Manufacturing expanded. Shipyards that had built cargo haulers began building different kinds of vessels. Though these new ships were kept in distant facilities, away from curious eyes, scientific research accelerated. Human physicists who had been content to study theoretical problems began focusing on practical applications, weapons, shields, engines, detection systems, counter-detection systems, and everywhere, in every human heart, a quiet fury burned. Not the hot rage that consumed itself in violence, but the cold calculation that outlasted everything. The galaxy didn't notice. Humanity seemed to accept their loss. They paid the Chromoths offered compensation, a pittance that barely covered 1% of the economic damage. They withdrew from galactic affairs, their ambassadors silent in assembly sessions. The other species assumed humanity was sulking. They assumed humans would eventually move on, as all species did after tragedy. They were wrong. Sarah Nakamura worked in the fields during the day and studied engineering at night. She was 53 years old, too old for most people to change careers. But she didn't care. She learned ship systems, weapons systems, anything that might someday help bring May home. Every night before sleep, she opened the ledger on her tablet and looked at her daughter's entry. May Nakamura, age 10, taken from Verdant Plains. Last seen, school transport, grid reference 45 alpha. Identifying features, scar on left knee. Birthmark on right shoulder. Status, missing. Below that was the investigation data. The transport ship May had been loaded onto its destination, Chromoth Processing Facility Theta 7. The facility's coordinates. The names of every Chromoth official who worked there. "I'm coming for you, baby," Sarah whispered. "We all are. Just hold on." Across human space, 200 billion people whispered the same promise to 3 million ghosts. The galaxy had made its choice. It had chosen convenience over justice. It had chosen the powerful over the weak. Now humanity would show them the price of that choice. But not today, not tomorrow. Humanity would wait. Humanity would prepare. And when the time came, humanity would collect every debt owed. With interest compounded over decades, the ledger was growing. The accounting had begun. And the Chromoth Collective had no idea that their harvest would become their judgment. 40 years passed. The galaxy moved on. The Chromoth Collective continued their harvests, taking humans from 2 more colonies with the same clinical efficiency. Each time, Earth protested. Each time, the Stellar Assembly declined to intervene. Each time, humanity documented everything and said nothing more. The ledger grew to include 7 million names, 7 million debts. And in secret, humanity transformed itself. The shipyards hidden in asteroid belts and behind gas giants have been building for decades. Not cargo ships, not exploration vessels, warships, thousands of them, each one incorporating technology the Assembly had never seen. Dr. James Park led the weapons development team. His son had been taken from Verdant Plains at age 8. For 40 years, James had channeled his grief into physics, creating weapons systems that could cut through Chromoth shields like paper through silk. "How many ships are ready?" asked Admiral Lisa Torres. She had been a lieutenant when the harvest happened. Now she commanded humanity's hidden fleet. 12,000, James replied, all incorporating the latest systems. "We're 2 generations ahead of anything the Chromoth have." "And the targets?" James pulled up a holographic display showing Chromoth space. Red markers appeared on hundreds of worlds. Every processing facility, every military installation, every government center. We've been tracking their expansion for 40 years. We know where everything is. Admiral Torres studied the display. "And the civilians. Precision strikes only. We're not them, Admiral. We're not here to harvest. We're here to collect." The collection began on the 40-year anniversary of Verdant Plains. Across human space, people gathered as they did every year to read names from the ledger. But this year was different. This year, as the names were read, humanity's hidden fleet jumped into action. 12,000 warships appeared simultaneously across Chromoth space. They emerged from hyperspace with inhuman precision, each ship exactly where it needed to be. Each weapon already locked on its target. The Chromoth defense fleets scrambled to respond. They outnumbered the human ships 3-1. It didn't matter. Human ships moved like nothing the Chromoth had ever encountered. They didn't maneuver like traditional vessels, following predictable physics. They seemed to slip between moments, appearing in one location and materializing in another with no transition. Their weapons didn't just penetrate shields. They phased through them as if they weren't there. The Battle of Chromoth Prime lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the planet's entire defense network was disabled. Not destroyed, disabled. Every military installation had been precision targeted. Every weapons platform had been neutralized. But the cities below were untouched. The civilian population was unharmed. Executive Venth, now elderly but still in command, watched from his command center as human boarding parties sealed off every exit. He activated his communication system, broadcasting to all Chromoth military channels. "This is impossible," he said. "How did you? You were nothing. You were prey." Admiral Tors's face appeared on his screen. She was in her 60s now, her hair gray, but her eyes were hard as diamonds. 40 years ago. "You took 3 million of our people," she said. "You called it resource acquisition. You called us prey. Today, we're here to correct your accounting error. What do you want?" Venth demanded. "We can negotiate." "We don't negotiate," Torres interrupted. "We collect debts. Every person you took, every facility you built, every official who authorized the harvests. We documented everything, executor, every single detail. And now the bill has come due. Across Chromoth space, human forces moved with surgical precision. They hit processing facilities first, liberating anyone they found. Then they secured government buildings, arresting officials whose names appeared in the ledger. Then they disabled military assets to prevent any coordinated response. It was the most precisely executed military operation in galactic history. And it happened so fast that most Chromoth civilians didn't even know they were being invaded. Until it was over. Captain Maria Santos, Sarah, Nakamura's granddaughter, led the assault on processing facility Theta-7. She'd grown up hearing stories about May, the great aunt she'd never met. Now she walked through the facility's corridors, searching for survivors. They found fewer than expected. Of the 3 million taken from verdant plains, only 42,000 remained alive. Most had died from overwork, malnutrition, or industrial accidents. The Chromoth had treated them as replaceable resources, working them until they broke and then acquiring new ones. Maria walked through dormitory after dormitory, her heart breaking at the conditions. Tiny cells, minimal food, no medical care. These people had lived in hell for 40 years. She found Sarah Nakamura in dormitory 7C. Her grandmother hadn't told her that Sarah was still alive. They'd assumed she died decades ago. But here she was, 83 years old, so thin Maria could count every bone in her body. "Sarah Nakamura?" Maria asked gently. The old woman looked up with clouded eyes. "That was my name," she whispered. "Long ago. Before. Do I know you? I'm Maria. I'm your granddaughter." Maria knelt beside her. "We're taking you home." Sarah stared at her for a long moment. Then tears began to run down her wrinkled face. "Home," she repeated. "I never thought. Is May?" Maria checked her tablet, scanning through the ledger. She found the entry. May Nakamura. Age 10 is status, deceased. Facility Theta 7. Date of death, 40 years prior. She looked at Sarah's hopeful face and knew she couldn't lie. I'm sorry, she said softly. May didn't make it. But we found her. We know what happened. We have her in the ledger. Sarah nodded slowly, new tears joining the old ones. Then she's not forgotten. Never, Maria promised. None of them are. That's why we came. The Stellar Assembly convened in emergency session. The delegates were in chaos. Species that had seemed permanent fixtures of galactic power had been defeated in hours by a species they dismissed as insignificant. The architect called for order. Ambassador Chen, humanity's actions constitute an illegal invasion of a sovereign assembly member. We demand immediate withdrawal. David Chen, older now, retired from diplomatic service, but recalled for this moment, stood at the speaking platform. He looked exactly as he had 40 years ago, except his hair was white and his eyes were colder. Illegal? He repeated. 40 years ago, the Chromoth committed an act of mass kidnapping. This assembly declared it outside your jurisdiction. You told us to accept compensation and move on. We did not accept. We did not move on. We documented. We prepared. And now we have collected what was owed. You cannot simply invade. The architect began. We can. Chen interrupted. And we did. This assembly had its chance to provide justice through law. You declined. So we provided justice through other means. Executive Vents Pod activated. His voice was weak. He'd been injured during the capture. You will pay for this. The assembly will unite against you. You cannot defeat all of us. Chen smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Can't we? We defeated your entire military in 6 hours. We did it without civilian casualties, using weapons technology you didn't know existed. We've been preparing for this moment for 40 years while you assumed we were sulking. He pulled up a holographic display. Here are the locations of 12,000 human warships, currently positioned throughout this sector. Here are the specifications of our weapons systems, our shield technology, our detection rays. Study them. Understand what we've become. The delegates stared at the data in shock. Humanity hadn't just matched assembly technology. They'd surpassed it by decades. But we're not conquerors, Chen continued. We're not interested in empire. We came for 3 things, and 3 things only. First, the return of all humans held in Chromoth facilities. Second, the arrest and trial of every official involved in authorizing the harvests. Third, guarantees that no species will ever harvest another again. And if we refuse? The architect asked. Then you'll join the Chromoth in learning what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Chen's voice was ice. We gave the assembly 40 years to do the right thing. You chose not to. We will not give you 40 more. The vote was taken. 39 in favor of Chen's demands. 8 abstentions. 0 against. The Chromoth Collective was expelled from the assembly. Their government was dissolved. Their military was permanently disbanded. Their territory was placed under assembly supervision pending reorganization. And every official whose name appeared in the ledger was arrested and transported to Earth to face trial. The trials lasted 2 years. They were broadcast across the galaxy, available for any species to watch. Humanity wanted no secrets, no hidden proceedings. They wanted the universe to see justice being done. Sarah Nakamura attended every day. She sat in the gallery, watching as the people who had destroyed her family were held accountable. Executor Venth was among them. When he was brought into the courtroom in restraints, he saw her sitting there. "You," he said, recognizing her from the facility. "You're still alive." "I am," Sarah said quietly, "and you're going to hear every name of every person who isn't, starting with my daughter." The prosecution was methodical. They didn't rely on emotion or rhetoric. They simply presented the ledger, name after name, face after face, life after life, each entry backed by documentation, testimony, forensic evidence. 7 million names took months to read into the record. When it was done, when every debt had been accounted for, the judges delivered their verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sentences varied based on individual involvement. But Executor Venth received the maximum: life imprisonment with mandatory labor service, exactly as he had imposed on millions of humans. "You called us prey," the lead judge said at sentencing. "You treated us as resources to be harvested. Now you will learn what it means to be harvested. You will work, you will labor, and you will do so until natural death, experiencing firsthand the fate you imposed on others." Venth was taken away screaming that it was unfair, that he had only followed the ways of his species, that the galaxy would never accept this. No one came to his defense. 10 years after the collection, humanity had fundamentally altered galactic politics. The Stellar Assembly had been reformed, with new bylaws prohibiting forced labor and establishing strict penalties for species that preyed on others. Humanity was offered full membership. They accepted, but with conditions. They maintained their fleet at full strength. They kept the ledger active, now documenting crimes against any species, not just humans. And they made it clear that while they preferred peace, they would enforce justice by whatever means necessary. Other species began calling them the auditors. It wasn't a compliment at first, but humanity embraced the title. Someone needed to keep accounts. Someone needed to remember. Someone needed to ensure that the powerful couldn't simply harvest the weak without consequences. Sarah Nakamura died peacefully at age 93. At her funeral, her granddaughter Maria read from the ledger, starting with May's entry. Thousands attended. Millions watched across human space. "She never forgot," Maria said. None of them forgot. They turned their grief into purpose, their loss into strength, their helplessness into action. They waited 40 years for justice, and they never wavered. She looked up at the crowd. "That's who we are now. We're the species that remembers. We're the species that keeps accounts. We're the species that will wait as long as necessary to see justice done. And we're the species that collects every debt owed. Some call this vengeance. We call it accounting." The funeral ended with a moment of silence for all 7 million names in the ledger. Then Maria activated a holographic display showing the current status: all debts paid, all accounts settled, justice served. But the ledger remained open. New entries appeared occasionally, crimes against other species, injustices that the Assembly overlooked, debts that needed collecting. And when they did, humanity responded, not with invasion or conquest, but with precise application of force. They removed threats. They rescued victims. They held perpetrators accountable. The galaxy learned to fear the Ledger, not because of what humanity would do immediately, but because of what they would do eventually. No matter how long it took, no matter how powerful you were, no matter how safe you thought yourself, if your name went into the Ledger, humanity would come to collect. Admiral Torres, now elderly and advisory rather than active command, gave an interview on the 50th anniversary of Verdant Plains. Do you regret the path humanity chose? The interviewer asked. Torres thought for a long moment. We were offered two choices 40 years ago. Accept our losses and move on, or refuse to accept and prepare to fight. Most species throughout history choose the first option. It's easier. It's safer. It lets you sleep at night. She paused. We chose the second option, and it changed us. We became harder, more patient, more willing to wait decades for justice. Some might say we lost our innocence, but our children sleep safely now. No species would dare harvest humans again. And not just humans. The entire galaxy is safer because someone was willing to keep accounts and collect debts. So no, she concluded, I don't regret it. I wish it hadn't been necessary. But given the choice the galaxy offered us, we made the only choice we could live with. We became the auditors, and the galaxy is better for it. The interview ended. Across human space, in schools and homes and government buildings, children learned about the Ledger. They learned the names. They learned the accounting. They learned that debts always come due, even if it takes 40 years. And in the depths of space, 12,000 warships continued their eternal patrol, ready to enforce the simple principle that humanity had bought with 40 years of patience. And 7 million names. Justice delayed is not justice denied. It is justice compounded. The Ledger remembers. The auditors collect. Always.